Good evening. Hello. My name is Jocelyn, and I'm a librarian with Halifax Public Libraries. And I am so excited to welcome you all to the Central Library tonight for an author reading with one of the world's best loved authors, Alexander McCall Smith. Alexander is, of course, the author of the #1 Ladies Detective Agency novels and a number of other standalone novels and series, including the longest-running serial novel in the world, the 44 Scotland Street novels. His works have been translated into more than 40 languages and have been bestsellers throughout the world. He also has an interesting, perhaps side career as a terrible musician, as a founding member of the Really Terrible Orchestra in his hometown of Edinburgh. And I read an interview that Alexander gave earlier this year, shortly before being presented with the prestigious Medal of Honor Award from the New York National Arts Club. And he was asked to explain what he thought the appeal of the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series was, especially to a North American audience. And his reply was, "The world can be a bit of a vale of tears at times, a very trying place. Mama Ramatswe is the very antithesis of that." And that certainly rings true for me, and I'm sure it does for most of you as well. I've enjoyed reading his books for the last almost 20 years for this series, and I am so looking forward to hearing tonight what Mamas Ramatswe and Makutsi are up to in the House of Unexpected Sisters. So won't you please join me in welcoming Alexander McCall Smith.
Thank you very much indeed, Jocelyn, for your very generous introduction, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to see me here this evening. I wonder if we could just adjust the microphone up a bit. Microphones are difficult things. Could it go across here a bit? And that way there. Is that right? That's all right? Is that right? Yes? Thank you very much. Microphones, people don't realize that all microphones throughout the world are made in the same place. There's one factory that produces microphones, and at the end of this factory there's a long desk with a man with a hammer. And as the microphones go past, he gives a dump to each of these microphones, and so they therefore have their idiosyncratic characteristics, and they go wrong. I've never met a microphone that hasn't gone wrong. This evening I'm sure it went. I'm sure this is a really good microphone. But I've had so many bad microphone experiences, including one classic experience I had some years ago when I was addressing the Edinburgh Hogmanay gathering, this big Hogmanay event in Edinburgh, and they had a literary one. They had a big audience, about 500 people, and I was speaking to it with Willie Dalrymple, who writes these wonderful books about Indian history that I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And Willie and I were in the green room at the back of the hall before the evening, and we were mic'd up with these lapel mics. And Willie said to me, "How old are your readers?" And I said, "Well, the range of ages, I've got some quite young readers and then some not so young readers." And then he said, "My readers are positively ancient." And that's the point at which we saw the organisers running down the corridor. And we had been transmitting into the hall. So I said to Willie, "Look, don't worry, if your readers are as ancient as you say they are, they wouldn't have heard what you said." So these microphones are very difficult. But Jocelyn, in your introduction, you very kindly mentioned the musical side of my life, if one can call it musical, which I don't think one really can. But I'm one of the world's worst musicians. I'm really not very good at all. But my wife and I, about 20 years ago, decided that we would start an orchestra for people who really were hopeless and who couldn't really play their instruments but would like to be in an orchestra. And this often comes to people when they see their kids going into a school orchestra, and you go to the school orchestra and you see the school orchestra having this tremendous fun, and you think, oh gosh, I missed out on that. And so we set up an orchestra, and we had to think of an amateur orchestra, obviously, and had to think of a name for it. And so we decided to call it the Really Terrible Orchestra, which of course means that what you see on the tin is what you get. And we advertised, and we had an awful lot of people actually applying to join. Many of them were clarinetists. We had a lot of clarinetists. And I couldn't quite work out why we had so many clarinetists. And then I realized that everybody learns the clarinet at school. This is something that everybody does. And I suspect if we did a poll this evening, we'd discover that probably 95% of people present here this evening learned the clarinet at school. And then you forget about it. And it's only very much later on, when you're having psychotherapy, that the suppressed clarinet memory comes up. It's called suppressed clarinet memory syndrome. And you remember, oh, I've got a clarinet. So go back and look in the attic when you get home today, and you'll probably discover a clarinet in the attic. And in fact, these days, if you buy a new house, you get a clarinet. It's really, it says three bedrooms, one CL. People think that's a closet. It isn't, it's clarinet. So we had all these clarinetists and various other people, all of whom were pretty useless. And they joined us. And we really have had a wonderful time. And that was 20 years ago. We've been playing after our fashion for 20 years. And it really is, we sound cacophonous. That hasn't discouraged us, because we've had tremendous fun doing it. And we've been on tour. We actually have been on tour. And you won't believe this, but we went to New York. And we went to and we played in the New York Town Hall. And it was full, or virtually full. And you know what a New York audience is like. They're so cool and jaded, they've seen it all before. They never clap at the end, they just sigh at the end of it. But we got a standing ovation from us. And they just absolutely loved the joke, because it was such a sort of opposite of the American philosophy of trying to succeed and trying to do well. There were people who knew they were bad, knew they weren't getting bad, and actually reveled in the fact of being awful. So, and then we went to the Netherlands, for some reason quite difficult to understand. The Netherlands government invited us to go and play in the Netherlands. And then this summer we went to Sweden, and we played in the principal concert hall in Stockholm. And the Swedes got the joke, they loved it. People really like to see a group of amateur musicians trying to reach the end at the same time. And in fact, we very rarely do that. In fact, there was one occasion when our conductor stopped us. Our conductor often has to stop us. He just says, oh, let's go back. And he stopped us because he said there was something really seriously wrong. And we discovered that one section of the orchestra was playing a totally different piece of music. They got their music mixed up. And, so they were doing their best. So I think you should have a really terrible orchestra in Halifax, because I suspect you've got quite a few musically challenged people in Halifax, and this will allow them to play together. This would be, speak to the library, this is the place to practice. I think the librarians would be very happy to let you play, you rehearse once a fortnight or something like that. You need to get a professional conductor. That's really important, with a sense of humour. And you don't have to pay your professional conductor, because you can get one who's doing a community service. And so, if you speak to the local prosecution authorities and say, when the next conductor's coming up in court, he can be given the chance of a prison sentence or conducting there, and you'll find that they'll go for the conducting option. So that's something which you could consider. And it's great fun socially. We've had several marriages. We had a marriage in the trumpet section, and then we had viola married a cello. And that was, so we've also had babies that have resulted from this orchestra. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Anyway, enough of that. What I'd like to do this evening is talk sort of fairly briefly. I'll talk for 20-25 minutes or so. I'll probably use most of that getting to this point. And then after that, I'd be very delighted to answer any questions that you have, and indeed deal with any complaints, because people do like to complain about books. There's nothing that gives people greater pleasure than to complain to authors about their books, and in particular to discover mistakes. People absolutely, readers love that. And if you find a mistake in a book, you can write to the author, and it doesn't matter how long ago this mistake was made. You write and say, oh, on page such and such you said that, and then you said something else on another page. And 10, 15 years after publication, it's absolutely fine. And if the author has died, you can write to the executive and point out the mistakes. It's great fun. And so I have made mistakes in my books. I wasn't proposing to say much about them this evening, and I haven't made mistakes quite as egregiously bad as one American novelist who, on page 1 of his books, described one of his characters as unfortunately only having one arm, and on page 142, the same character claps his hands together. And that's an editorial problem. In my view, that's the editor's fault. That's not the author's fault, because editors shouldn't expect authors to have a sufficiently long concentration span to remember how many limbs their characters have. I blame the editor for that. Because you can make mistakes in books, but one thing you mustn't get wrong is the first sentence. That's really, really important. The first sentence is the vital bit, because in many cases, that's the only sentence that the critics read. People don't realize that literary critics have this extraordinary learned ability to judge a book on the basis of the first sentence. And most reviews that you see in the newspapers are based just on the first sentence. It's an extraordinary talent they have. They can read the first sentence and then write 2,000 or 3,000 word review and always get it right. It's the most extraordinary thing. So you get your first sentence absolutely right. And we've all got favourite first sentences. My favourite first sentence is a sentence from Karen Blixen's Out of Africa, where she says right at the beginning of the book, I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Ngong Hills. It's a wonderful sentence with that gorgeous resonance in the Ngong Hills, at the foot of the Ngong Hills. And that is, you may recall the movie that they did of Out of Africa, where the camera pans across this gorgeous East African scenery, and Meryl Streep, who's playing Karen Blixen, says, I had a farm in Africa at the foot of the Ngong Hills. It's a lovely, lovely beginning to that. And it's a very moving memoir, that. I was in Kenya in January, and we went to Karen Blixen's house. There's a place called Karen, which is just outside Nairobi these days. Nairobi's rather sort of moved out to meet it. But you can go to her house. And we went out from the veranda onto the lawn, and I looked up and I saw the Ngong Hills there. It was a wonderful moment. It's when you love a book, or you love a particular part of a book, to then go and see that there it is, what the author has described, and it's there before you. It's quite a special moment. I also went to Karen Blixen's house in outside Copenhagen some years ago. I was visiting my Danish publisher, and she said, would you like to go and see Karen Blixen's house? And we went out there, and it's really quite moving, because you can see her study, and there's the desk with the photograph of Dennis Finch Hatton, who was her lover, on the desk. And then you follow a winding path behind the house, and you get to a great oak tree, and under that tree is the grave of Karen Blixen. I found it very, very moving. And of course, she has that lovely first line. There's another first line which I love, which comes from Rose Macaulay's Towers of Trebizond, which is a marvellous comic novel. Very few people read it these days, if any, but it's very, very funny. And her first line is an absolute classic. It goes as follows. "Hold my camel," said my Aunt Dot on her way back from High Mass. You know, that's really good because there's something for everybody there. You've got a camel, and there aren't enough camels in contemporary fiction. You've got a camel, you've got an aunt, what is the relationship between the narrator and the aunt, and you've got a bit of religion with this mention of High Mass. So it's a very, very good first line, but not to be beaten by, I think, one of the finest first lines ever, which is from a book called The Young Visitors by Daisy Ashford. And this book is a really wonderful little book. It's a novella, it's about 60 or 70 pages, written by a 9.5-year-old girl in Edwardian times. Daisy Ashford sat down and wrote this wonderful, naive classic. Some people said that they thought that J.M. Barrie, author of Peter Pan, had written it, but in fact it was the work of this 9.5-year-old hand. And the first line of that is just absolutely wonderful, bearing in mind that it's written by a 9.5-year-old. And the first line is, "Mr. Saltiner was an elderly man of 42. And when you point that out to teenagers, they say, well, what's wrong with that? So anyway, let's leave first lines, etc., and get on to the number one ladies detective agency. We've got volume 18 of the number one ladies detective agency published just really this week or last week, very, very short time ago. And that's called The House of Unexpected Sisters. And the title, I suppose, does give something away. In fact, it gives away the whole plot. But there we are. There are some books that do that. Tolstoy's War and Peace really gives that away, and so on. So The House of Unexpected Sisters, and we're back in Botswana with Mara Matswe and Mama Kutsi, her assistant, in that wonderful little office of the number one ladies detective agency. And the various things that are happening. One of the things that is happening is that Mara Matswe is asked to deal with the case of unfair dismissal. She's got a very strong sense of justice and injustice, and so she often helps people, even if they can't afford the fees, tries to sort things out for them. So she's dealing with that, but at the same time, she discovers that there's another person called Mara Matswe who she sees a photograph in the paper of a nurse called Mara Matswe, and so that raises the issue of who is this other Mara Matswe, because she thought she knew all the members of the Ramatswe family, and this is a new member to her. So the book is about that, and it's I suppose a story of discovery of family. Interestingly enough, I've been quite surprised in that I've known in my time quite a number of people who've discovered siblings that they didn't know they had, because you'd think that, generally speaking, we know who our brothers and sisters are. But in fact, I've known people who have discovered half brothers, half sisters they haven't known, and that must be really rather nice or awful, depending on the sibling you discover. And I would have thought that probably there's a bit of moment of indecision when you have to decide whether you're going to meet this sibling or not, because if you're not going to like the sibling, then maybe it'd be better not to meet them, and so on. So it is it's a more common problem or issue than one might imagine. Mara Matswe, of course, deals with it very well. She deals with everything extremely well. She's such a nice, balanced person. She's not based on anybody, by the way. People often say to me, is she based on a particular person? And I say, no, that I couldn't take you to Botswana and introduce you to this person and say, this is Mara Matswe. But I could certainly take you to Botswana and introduce you to people who are pretty like her, because she's a type. And I've met lots of ladies in Botswana who are exactly like Mara Matswe. They exist, intuitive, hardworking, and there's a certain cheerfulness and dealing with life with, I think, great generosity of spirit. And so she's real in that sense. I do put some actual real people into the books, but they come in as named real people. They actually exist. I don't base characters on people, because I think that could be unfair, because if a person feels that the character is based on them, they haven't really necessarily got much of a means of reply. But I will introduce actual people into it. I've done this a lot in the Scotland Street book. There are quite a few characters in Edinburgh who actually are real people who find themselves in Scotland Street book with their consent. One of whom was one of the former First Ministers of Scotland, who's the equivalent of a Premier in a Canadian province. And we had First Minister of Scotland. I met him at a do, and he said, "Oh, I'm reading your Scotland Street books." And I said, "Well, that's great, First Minister." And then very unwisely said, "Would you like to be in them?" And he said, "Well, yes, okay." And then I had to find something for him to do. And, it was a little bit difficult. And eventually I decided that I had little Bertie, who's one of the characters in the Scotland Street books, walking down a steep road in Edinburgh, and he freezes in the middle of the road, and there's this bus coming hurtling down the hill. Obviously there's going to be some sort of disaster. And it just so happens that the First Minister of Scotland is walking on the pavement opposite him, and he dashes out and saves Bertie from the bus and puts him back on the pavement. And after I wrote this, I sent it to the First Minister's press secretary and said, just check up with the First Minister that this is okay. And within 45 minutes, back came the reply saying, "Very satisfactory." He had rather a bad press, and at long last year he was doing something heroic, and that's what politicians like. You know, they love that sort of thing. Anyway, so that's the #1 Ladies Detective Agency series. I've got various other series of books. The Isabel Dalhousie series is another favourite of mine. That's set in Edinburgh. Isabel Dalhousie is a moral philosopher. She runs something called the Review of Applied Ethics, but she spends her time getting involved in people's problems, and she's one of these people who finds it very difficult to draw the line as to whom she has to help and whom she doesn't have to help. So that's a bit of a problem for her. And she leads otherwise an ideal life. She has got a much younger husband called Jamie, who's a musician. He plays the bassoon. And initially, Isabel's got a niece called Kat, who's got very bad taste in men. She goes for the wrong sort of man, as many nieces do. And she's had a series of really unsuitable boyfriends, and then she gets this rather nice boyfriend called Jamie. And Isabel thinks, well, at long last, Kat's getting the right sort of man. But in fact, because he's so nice, Kat gets rid of him. And Isabel rather liked him, so she thinks she'll continue her friendship with him. And she does that. She continues to see him. And I thought he would be quite a useful sidekick for her in these books, in a platonic sense, a platonic friendship. But I came under increasing pressure to let her have an affair with this young man. And I was interviewed by a journalist from the Daily Express in London, and this woman said to me, "You must let Isabel have an affair with that young man." And I was shocked. And I said, "But these books are set in Edinburgh, and we don't go in for that sort of thing." But I yielded to the pressure, and I said to her, "Well, why should I let Isabel have an affair with Jamie?" And she said, "Because it would be very empowering for your lady readers over 40. And so I let it happen. And indeed, I received a number of letters from lady readers over 40 who said they were indeed empowered. Then, of course, there's another one of my favourite series, the 44 Scotland Street series, which is a serial novel. I publish that chapter by chapter as I write it in the Scotsman newspaper, then it comes out as a book. And I love doing that, in particular because it's got one of my favourite characters in it, the favourite characters of my books. And that is a little boy called Bertie. And Bertie is 6 at the beginning of the series, which is 12 volumes ago, and he's 6 for 8 years. And eventually, I give him the 7th birthday when everybody else is making progress, but Bertie still seems to be 6. And Bertie's problem is his mother. And that's a very common problem for little boys. If you ask them what their problem in life is, they look a bit shifty. And you sort of scratch a bit, and you realise that mother's the problem. And particularly mothers too pushy. That's a very major issue. We have, in Edinburgh, where I live, a very, very serious problem of excessively pushy mothers. We've got the highest incidence of pushy mothers in Scotland, in Edinburgh. The Scottish Government's aware of it, but we never to propose anything. And it's a universal problem, actually, pushy mothers. In Canada, you've got a big problem with that in Canada. And you know where the epicenter of that is? It's West Vancouver. West Vancouver has the highest number of pushy mothers. It's got more pushy mothers in West Vancouver than all the prairie provinces put together. Extraordinary situation. And I was in West Vancouver a few years ago and talking about somebody about pushy mothers, and this man said, oh yes, boy do we have a problem here in West Vancouver. And he gave me an example. He said he was in a coffee house, and this woman came in with her stroller with this 1.5-year-old son, a 1.5-year-old son, sitting in the stroller with his poor little arms hanging out like that. And she said, he gets so tired after his dance classes. So it is a big problem. And I develop a sense, when I go somewhere, I develop a sense of whether we're in pushy mother territory. I've just been in Toronto, and my pushy mother radar was quite active in the bit of Toronto I was staying in. I don't know what the situation in Nova Scotia is. I think you're probably more balanced about this, but you may have pockets of pushy mothers in particular places. You speak to the teachers, they're the ones who can tell you. They let you know whether you've got pushy mothers. And Bertie's mother, Irene, is seriously pushy. She makes Bertie, who's only 6 for most of the books, makes Bertie go to yoga classes. He goes to yoga classes called Yoga for Tots, where some of the children are so small they can't even sit up and have to be pushed into the yoga by their pushy mothers. And then he has to go for saxophone lessons. He does a very good rendition of As Time Goes By from Casablanca, which in his case it doesn't. And then he goes to, he has Italian lessons with his mother. He has Italian conversazione lessons so he can appreciate Italian culture and has to learn Italian, and then he has psychotherapy. So for Bertie, all the time he just wants to be an ordinary little boy, doing all the things that ordinary little boys do. While he's, at the beginning of the books, he goes to an advanced kindergarten, doesn't go to an ordinary kindergarten, goes to an advanced kindergarten. And while he's at his advanced kindergarten, his mother, Irene, goes to a floatarium, where she floats in a flotation chamber to de-stress. And Irene's in her flotation chamber one day, and her cell phone goes, and it's the principal of the advanced kindergarten, Miss Christabel McFadden, on the line. And Miss McFadden says, would you kindly come up to the advanced kindergarten? There has been an incident. And so Irene's a bit cross about this. She gets out of her flotation chamber and goes up to the advanced kindergarten to be greeted by a hatchet-faced Miss McFadden, who says, there has been an incident. One of the children has written graffiti on the toilet wall. And Irene bristles and says, well, why do you look at me? Why do you think it's my Bertie? And Miss McFadden says, oh, because he's the only one who can write. And then she adds, and it's in Italian. So poor little Bertie, he just wants to, and one of the main things he wants is a Swiss Army penknife. That's what he really wants. And when he has his 7th birthday, he gets two presents from his mother, from Irene, 2 boxes, and he opens the first of these with his heart in his mouth because he thinks it might be the Swiss Army penknife, but it isn't. It's a gender-neutral play figure. In other words, it's a doll. He's been given a doll. And he's so embarrassed, because what will happen if people at school, he's then at a Steiner school, what will happen if the other kids at the school realize that he's been given a doll, particularly, he has two tormentors there. There's a little girl called Olive, who's positively poisonous, who says that Bertie's going to have to marry her when they're 20, and she says she's got it in writing. And then there's a boy called Tofu, Tofu is the son of two very well-known Edinburgh vegans. But unfortunately, his mother has recently died of starvation. And so, we get letters from vegans about that. We're perfectly healthy, they say. And, anyway, so he doesn't want Tofu to hear about that at all. And so he's very embarrassed getting this gender-neutral play figure. So he opens the other present, hoping again that it might be, if not a Swiss Army penknife, it might be a train set or something other, but it isn't. It isn't. It's a junior UN peacekeeping kit with little blue armbands and maps and pacification movements. So he's really terribly upset. And every so often I give him a glimpse of freedom. I let him have a bit of freedom. I remove Irene from the scene for a while. There was one book in which Irene supports a charity which sends relief supplies to Romania. And so she goes off they all go off to say goodbye to the trucks that are taking the relief supplies off. There's a piper there playing Will You Know Come Back Again. And Bertie's there with his mum and his little brother Ulysses. And suddenly he realizes his mother's no longer there. And he doesn't know what's happened. And in fact, what has happened is that Irene had got into one of the trucks to inspect the relief supplies, and they closed the back. And they didn't hear her banging on the side until they reached Hungary. So Bertie has a bit of freedom there, which is rather nice. And then in another case, he persuades his mother to enter into a competition which offers 5 days holiday as the prize, because he thinks that'll be a way of getting his mother off the scene for a while. And this is run by a place on the Persian Gulf, which is wanting to expand its tourist industry, and they want a new slogan. And so Irene wins with her slogan, which is so much sand and so close at hand. And so she wins 5 days on the Persian Gulf. And she goes off there, and unfortunately she spills coffee on her dress. She needs a new dress. There's a boutique in the hotel there, which the only outfit they have is a Bedouin lady's desert outfit. And that, of course, completely covers her. So she wears that, and she's mistaken for the new wife of a Bedouin sheikh. And she's taken off to a harem in the desert. And the British Chargé d'Affaires does his best to try and get her released, but the sheikh is having none of it, because he'd had a bit of trouble with his wives at recent, and Irene appears to have calmed them down because she's formed a book club. So that takes her out of the scene for a while. And final thing, another occasion, he goes off with his father fishing one day. He goes to one of the lochs in the Pentland Hills just outside Edinburgh, and Bertie doesn't quite catch a fish, almost, but his life, he doesn't really seem destined to achieve great happiness, so he doesn't quite catch a fish. But they go off, and a mist comes down, they get lost afterwards, and when they try to get back to the car. And he ends up in a farmhouse, and the farmer's wife says, "Oh, come away and I'll make you a cup of tea, and then I'll get my husband to run you back to the car." And Bertie suddenly realizes, in this house is a real 6-year-old boy, a boy leading a real boy's life. And this is a little boy called Andy. And Andy's very nice to Bertie, and he says, "Bertie, would you like to come and see my things?" And Bertie says, "Oh, yes, please, Andy." He takes him upstairs to his room, and he opens his drawer, and there in the drawer is not 1, but 6 Swiss Army penknives. And Bertie's little heart fills with joy at the sight, and Andy reaches for one of the penknives, takes it up, and he says, this, Bertie, is a Swiss army penknife. The Swiss army fights only with penknives. And Bertie says, I've heard that. So we'll see what happens to Bertie. Relief is in sight. His mother's going off to do a PhD in Aberdeen with Dr. Fairbairn, the psychotherapist, so that might improve matters. We'll see. And of course, Dr. Fairbairn, Ulysses, little Ulysses, looks remarkably like Dr. Fairbairn. But I'm not suggesting, I've never made the direct suggestion, but that is something which has been noted by Bertie, who says to his mother, Mummy, doesn't Ulysses look like Dr. Fairbairn? And Irene gets a bit flustered and said, Bertie, you don't say that to mummies. Anyway, there we are. Now, finally, I'll say a little bit about, I write standalone novels, which have nothing to do with series. They're just single novels. And there's a standalone, the last one I wrote was called My Italian Bulldozer. And that has been published in Canada now. And My Italian Bulldozer, interestingly enough, well, again, the title rather gives the game away, but that's set in Italy. And that actually is based on something that actually really happened to me last year, which I thought I'd mention to you. Last year, I was doing a bit of writing and I wanted to finish it, and I was having difficulty getting the necessary peace and quiet to do so. And my wife said, well, why don't you go away for a couple of weeks and work on it and get it done in isolation? And I said, well, that's great. I think I'll go to Italy, because I'm a great fan of Italy. And so I bought a ticket from Edinburgh to Pisa, and I intended to go to a wonderful Tuscan hill town called Montalcino, which is in the Sienese hills, and it's one of these beautiful Italian hill towns up on top of the hill looking out over the valleys below. And they make a very good wine there called Brunello di Montalcino. It's one of the best of the Italian wines. And so I thought I'd go there for a couple of weeks. So I got on this plane from Edinburgh to Pisa. And on the plane I met a man sitting next to me who was very friendly. Italians usually very friendly, conversational people, and we got chatting. And he was a businessman who dealt in ceramic tiles. You know, they make these wonderful ceramic tiles in Italy, and he'd been on business in Scotland and was going back to Pisa. So we chatted away, and when we got to Pisa, I said goodbye to him, as one does to friends newly made on an aircraft. And we went down into the arrival hall, and I went to the car rental office there. And I gave my ID and I said, I've reserved a car with you. The young man behind the desk took the ID and shook his head and said, no reservation. And I said, oh, well, I did make a reservation. And fortunately, I printed out the email in which they had replied to me and saying, we have reserved the following car for you. So I showed this to him, and he said, that is no longer valid. So I was a bit taken aback by this. And I said, well, if you can't give me that car, give me another car. And he said, I'm very sorry, this is a holiday weekend, all our cars are out. And so I was pretty flummoxed by that. And at that point, my new friend from the plane was walking past. He came over and said, anything wrong? And I explained what the situation was. He said, look, don't worry, I've got a friend who's got a vehicle rental business just a couple of miles from the airport. Come with me and he'll fix you up. And that's typical Italian friendliness. Everybody in Italy has got a friend who can sort out difficulties that you're in. So I went off with him to his friend, and we got a wonderful welcome, and he explained the situation, and his friend at this other vehicle rental place said, oh, I'm so sorry, this is a holiday weekend, and I'm afraid all our vehicles are out, and I've only got one vehicle left, and that is a bulldozer. And I said, I can't drive a bulldozer. And I showed him my license. It said license to drive cars. And he said, no problem. In Italy, cars include bulldozers. So I was in a real bind, because these people were being so helpful. They really wanted to help me. It would be churlish on my part to say that I didn't. So I signed the agreement. And then, you know, when you hire a car, you go out and you walk around it. And so I went and I walked around the bulldozer. Then I got into the bulldozer and he showed me, there was a lever, he said, push that forward, that makes it go forward, back is reverse. And then another lever there, don't touch that, that's the blade, don't touch that. And so I hired this bulldozer and I set off for Montalcino. It took me some time. But it was really rather nice, driving through the Italian countryside. On a bulldozer, you really raise high, you get a very good view of all the surrounding features. And of course, if there are any features you don't like, well, you're on a bulldozer. So off we went, and eventually I reached Montalcino, and I went to the hotel where I'd reserved a room, which was called the Albergo Il Giglio, the Lily Inn. And I thought, I hope they've got my reservation, but I went in, they were fine. They said, oh yes, we've got your reservation here, your room there, and you can park your bulldozer around here. And so I set up there, and over the next 2 weeks I had a wonderful time. I got a lot of work done, and every morning I went and had coffee in the main piazza, in a cafe in the main piazza, and I got talking to the locals, and I became very friendly with the local priest, who took his coffee at the same time. We talked about all sorts of things. And then 2 days before I was due to go, the priest said to me, look, I've got a brother who's got a wine estate just outside Montalcino here, and he's asked you whether you'd like to come for lunch tomorrow. And I said, oh, well, that's great, thank you very much, I'd love that. And then the priest said, could we go on your bulldozer? Because his car was in the garage. And I said, well, yes, there's a spare seat. And so the next morning, the priest and I set off on the bulldozer. And we got to this wine estate, wonderful welcome from the brother. And he said, oh, come in and have just a simple Tuscan lunch. It was 8 courses, really very nice. And at the end of it, he said, come outside and I'll show you the vineyard. So I went outside and he explained that Brunello de Montalcino has to be produced within a very strictly circumscribed zone of production. And if you're outside the zone of production, you have to sell your wine as a Rosso de Montalcino, for which you get a much lower price. So he was just outside the zone of production. And the boundary of the zone of production was a low stone wall which ran all the way around. And he said, do you think you might perhaps... I was in a very difficult position. I couldn't say no to these people. They'd been so kind to me. So I got on the bulldozer and I reversed, and I took a good run at it. And it took me an hour and a half, but I shifted the zone of production so that his vineyard was now within it. And they were so grateful. They were tremendously grateful. And we went inside, and he said, thank you so much for this, and we must toast one another. And so he got out a couple of glasses, one for the priest, and then he got a bottle of his wine and poured it, and we toasted one another in what was now Brunello de Montalcino.
That was lovely. My cheeks actually hurt from laughing. And I have to tell you that I have a friend who works at the church down the street, and we have a lunch bunch choir that meets every week or so. And I mentioned the orchestra to her, and she seriously has been trying to get a very bad orchestra started where people can come and play instruments. So she will be inspired. So, we are going to do a bit of a Q&A with Alexander, and afterwards we will ask everybody to stay seated for a few minutes, and we'll get him situated to sign some books, and then we'll have some staff who can help you queue up for the signing. And don't worry, he has promised that he will not leave this building until all of your books are signed. So, no worries. So we've got a couple of staff people, I think, who are ready with mics who can run up to get your question. And if you just holler it out before they arrive, I can always repeat it so that we can all hear. All right, so does anybody have a question?
Just curious what instrument you play badly.
Well, thank you. I did start off playing the bassoon, then I moved to the contrabassoon, and then I started to play brass instruments. And I now play, in fact, it's still woodwind, not brass. The sax is technically in the woodwind family. I play the baritone saxophone in the orchestra, and my wife plays the E-flat horn, very flat.
In the #1 Ladies Detective Agencies series, you have, my husband reads the books out loud sometimes, and so the names are all really great. And I would like to know how to say the name of the woman who runs the orphanage.
Oh yes, that's Ma Potokwane. Ma Potokwane. The Ma in Setswana, which is MMA, the double M slightly accentuates the M sound. So Setswana speaker would say Ma. We just say Ma, but Ma. It's like, and Ra is a sort of rolled Ra. And Potokwane is her name, yes.
And does Mr. J.L.B. Matagoni ever have a first name?
Well, yes, he does. Now, he does have, firstly, he's got 3 first names. But I'm never going to reveal in the books what they are, but I can tell you tonight, on the basis of strict confidentiality. Strict confidentiality, in Edinburgh, our definition of strict confidentiality is tell only one other person at a time. So, and I will tell you, it's John Limpopo Basil, and he's embarrassed by the Basil bit of that. And so he was always just known as JLB Matacone. But John Limpopo Basil, but I'm never going to reveal that. So please keep that to yourselves.
So much enjoyed your story of the first lines in the books.
Thank you.
And we've been sitting here with a picture worth 1,000 words, The House of the Unexpected Sisters, and all the covers of your recent books. Have you any comments about the covers that you have chosen for your books and how you've arrived at them?
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm glad you like them. That is, that's a particularly lovely illustration, that. And I am very hands-on when it comes to covers. Many authors aren't, or they're perhaps not given the opportunity to be, but I actually really get involved right at the beginning, and I often talk to the art directors in the publishing companies and come up with suggestions. And so that cover is done by a great friend of mine, Ian McIntosh, who's Scotland's best illustrator, really. And Ian and I work very closely together. So Ian does the American and Canadian editions of the Maranossi books. He also did the Italic Bulldozer cover, both in the UK and in Canada and the US. He's really very good. But the way it works is I will say to him, in fact with this one, I said I'd seen a picture of that's called a kraal in southern Africa. In East Africa, that would be, they talk about bomas, which is a sort of circular wooden fence within which the house and the animals may be kept. And I'd seen a picture of that sort of thing in Botswana, and I thought, what a wonderful, it was a design of some sort, what a wonderful thing to have something like that. We'll put the cattle down the side because the cattle are so important in that society. And so Ian went off and he came up with that, and when I saw it, I just was blown away with that and said, that's just so gorgeous. Because it's got, I think the subliminal message in that is the security of the home. The security of the home and the farm and the animals, and outside that is the wider world. And that, I think, is probably what most of us yearn for in some sense. We want the security of place. We want the security, and we want to be encirclement, in a sense, by those whom we love and know. And the world beyond that can be a little bit intimidating. So there's a wonderful psychological message going on underneath that, and the colours are so lovely. So when I'll be speaking to Ian on the phone tomorrow, because we've got some cover business to do, I'll pass on your remarks, and I know he'll be very flattered by that, because people often just ignore the illustrators, and they don't realise how important they are in the whole process. So thank you for that.
Hello.
Hello.
I have two quick questions, if that's all right.
Yes, of course.
Number one, I played the oboe, or used to in high school, and so it's now going to be very badly.
Yes.
And when we come to Edinburgh, can we actually join in?
Well, if you're bad enough, I mean, you might. We give a concert at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe every year, and we get 600 people coming to it. Some of them are actually not related to any of us. And it's very interesting seeing the members of the public sitting there as they hear this, and they gradually, the penny drops, and they realise that we really are bad. What I would say is that it's difficult to actually just get occasional players, even as distinguished as yourself, into the concert. But if you set up the Really Terrible Orchestra of Halifax, we will undoubtedly establish communication with yourself. And we did have an occasion where we've got 5 Really Terrible Orchestras in the United States, and we had a weekend where many of them came over and played with us, which was great. So we'd be delighted to welcome the Really Terrible Orchestra of Halifax into this international brotherhood of bad orchestras challenged.
Yes, could you say something about your honest love for Botswana and its people?
Yes, well, thank you. Yes, I first lived in Botswana back in 1981. Actually, was when I lived there, and I'd been there a few times beforehand, and I was very taken by the country. It was quite extraordinary. There's an atmosphere there. I'm sure there'll be people with us this evening who know Botswana, and I hope that they might feel the same. That it's a country which has a very, very extraordinary quality to it, and you just know when you're in Botswana, you feel you're in a good place. It's extraordinary. It just is a very fine country, and I remember being really, really struck by that. By the fact that this was a country in a very troubled region of southern Africa, that nonetheless was consistently democratic, where human rights were by and large observed. I mean, obviously every country has its little bad spots, but Botswana really has been a model state in Africa, and they're remarkable people. They're very courteous people. They're very polite people. They're quite restrained. They're not sort of loud and bushy people. They're quite restrained. But it really is a remarkable culture, and I was very, very taken with it. And that's really what prompted me to write about it. I had no idea when I sat down and wrote the first of these books that I was engaging in a very long literary conversation with the country and with the people. But that's what it developed into. And I make no apology for the fact that my portrayal of Botswana is a very positive one. I'm accused of not recognizing that there are other sides to it. But in fact, I think the problem is that external writers from outside who turn their gaze to sub-Saharan Africa often just concentrate on things that are wrong and concentrate on confrontation and the various pathologies, social pathology, economic pathology, and so on. And so Africa gets, in a way, a very bad press right from the start. I'm not saying that there aren't things like that occurring and that these are major issues, but the other side of the coin is that these countries seem to me to be full of people who are leading good lives and leading them with dignity. And I was struck by that, and that's what I wanted really to convey in these books. So it's a country I love and admire. I have great admiration for Botswana and for what they've done. They've built the country themselves since independence in 1966. It was a British protectorate before that. When it got independence, it had something like 8 miles of tarred road and a couple of secondary schools, and that was it. It just been a policy, I suppose one would say, of relatively benign neglect. And Botswana, they built the country themselves, and they're very proud of it. I remember I was in Botswana some years ago, and the BBC were making a film about the books, and they were filming a conversation that I was having with a man out at the orphan farm. It's a children's home which I use as the basis for Ma Potokwane's orphan farm. And I was talking to this man, and I said to him, "Are you proud of your country?" Now, that's a sort of comment that we wouldn't, in our sort of society, we wouldn't go and say to somebody, "Are you proud of your country?" It'd be a little bit naive question. But in Africa, it's perfectly okay. You can say, "Are you proud of your country?" And tears came to his eyes, and he said, "I'm very, very proud of my country. I'm very proud of this one." And everybody who was there watching this recognised that this was absolutely genuine on his part, and very moving for me.
So we have time for, this will be our last question.
You're a very prolific writer, and I must confess I've never read any of them. But I must ask you, I assume you don't dictate.
No.
You never get any book finished.
No, I don't dictate. No.
What do you write on?
Sorry?
Do you write with a pen, or?
I don't. Raising dictation is a very interesting question. I find if I dictate, it's a different voice, and it looks on the page, it's stilted. I dictate in a stilted way, so I can dictate a letter, but I can't dictate a book. For the most part, I write on a word processor. So I write on a computer because I find writing on the screen very, very easy. It really, I think it provides a very easy form of access to the subconscious mind where the ideas and sentences are formed. So that's the way I do it. And occasionally I will use a pen if I'm writing just a smaller thing. I've got notebooks. I always carry notebooks with me, and the notebook might have a page or two in which I've written something. Sometimes when I'm writing a book, I start, what occurs to me first is the very last 2 sentences, and I write those before I write the whole book. It's a very curious thing, and those I write in pen in my notebook. I have an image of what is happening at the very end, and then a couple of... So that's how I work, and I write every day. I have to write every day because I do about 4 or 5 books a year. And so I write quite quickly. I write about 1,000 words an hour when I'm sitting there. I go into a sort of trance state, and I don't have to say to myself, what's going to happen now? It just comes.
How many have you written?
How many books?
Yes.
I've written over 100 books. Sorry, I don't want to sound boastful, but since you asked.
So I just want to thank you again. I'm so glad that you've come back to Halifax, and we're very happy to have you. And thank all of you for coming here tonight. And like I said, we'll get Alexander all set up to sign some books, and then we'll help you all queue up to do that. And I hope you all have had a lovely evening. Thank you very much.